right, welcome to the stage, Hamish Mackenzie.
Thank you very much, Lucian. So whether you're starting your day, finishing it, or somewhere in between, welcome. My name is Hamish Mackenzie, and thank you for joining us for this next session, which is preparing your data layer for AI-driven product and supply chain decisions, sponsored today by AdLib Software. First off, it'd be great if you could tell us who you are, where you are, just gives us a feel for who's joining us. We always like that. And while you do that, grab a coffee as well, whatever you need to do. Bit of housekeeping. The session is going to be an hour long, as I'm sure you all probably know. I'm going to introduce the topic, the guest speakers, and we're going to be getting lots of valuable insights from them, of course, but we're also going to leave some time for questions from the most important people in the room, and that is, of course, you, our audience. So please make sure you put your questions in the Q&A function in the platform, not in the chat. If you put them in the chat, they're likely to get lost. If you put them in the Q&A area, then it'll just make it easier for me to find them, and you're more likely to get your question answered. So that would be doing me a huge favor if you do that. So thank you. All right, so with that over, let's get into the session. So far, you've heard a lot about how AI, data sovereignty, predictive infrastructure are reshaping manufacturing and supply chains, but most of it, or a lot of it, has been focused on sensors, systems, streams. In this session, we're going to focus more on the hidden half of your data layer, things like documents, drawings, records, and show how turning that unstructured data into accurate, governed RAG-ready content is the key to making AI-driven product and supply chain decisions you can actually trust in the real world, okay? So with that said, let's introduce our fantastic guest speakers today. First off, we have Chris Huff, who is the CEO at AdLib Software, our sponsor. He's a growth-focused tech and SaaS leader with deep chops in AI, automation, and digital transformation. And he's led teams at Base 64 AI, Tungsten Automation, and Deloitte. He's also a former US Marine Corps major, so he's dangerous as well. And now he's bringing that experience to AdLib to help scale their impact across regulated industries. Thanks for joining us, Chris. Now we have Anthony Vigliotti, who's the CPO of AdLib. He brings over 20 years of experience as business workflow and intelligent document processing with roles at Kofax, Nuance, NSI, and Xerox. And he's led across product, partnerships, and development, and pairs a mechanical engineering degree with a master's in IT from RIT. Finally, we have Sabrina Juice, who's Director, Program and Lifecycle Management for New Systems Americas at Siemens. She's leads a forward-thinking technology group specialized in next-level factory automation. She has an interdisciplinary background in advanced and sustainable manufacturing, coupled with expertise in cutting-edge AI technologies, and her goal is really to elevate operations to new heights using all those skills. Her visionary leadership is reshaping the manufacturing landscape, one innovative solution at a time, from customer discovery to go-to-market strategy development and technology adoption at scale. And go-to-market strategy is also something I know a little bit about. That's what I've been focusing on over the last 15 or 20 years. I'm a former IDC analyst, and I've been running my consulting practice from here in Munich, Germany since 2006. And I consult on multiple aspects of go-to-market strategy for deep tech, startup, scale-up companies, but also larger ones. And my aim is to give CEOs the clarity, focus, and execution leverage they need to turn their complex technologies into reliable growth without adding too many additional people where necessary. So there's only one of me in Munich on LinkedIn, I think. So it shouldn't be too hard to find me. Please do connect with me if you're interested about what I do. With all of that said, let's get into it. And before we get into the discussion, I think we want to bring up our first poll. So Paul, could you bring up our first poll? We just want to get a little bit of insight into where you all are at in our audience today. So if you could just give us your answer on that. I'll give you 10 seconds or so to do that, and then we'll just see what the result is. Okay, so Paul, could you just bring up the results and see what we've got? So here we go. So we've got 29% people in production for one or more critical use cases already, 90% in pilots, 90% in planning, and almost a third of people still don't really have a strategy for their unstructured data. So I'm sure that's going to be interesting and inform some of the comments that we get from our panelists now as we go through. All right, so Chris, if I can start with you. Your last presentation at IoT World Summit and some of the recent articles you've written point to the same tension, and I think we're experiencing that everywhere. I'm certainly experiencing with my clients as well. So excitement around AI is very high, but transformation that needs to take place is kind of stuck because leaders are not able to trust all the data that they're feeding into their models. So from your vantage point, looking back over the last kind of 12, 18 months, what has changed that makes accuracy the deciding factor now for industrial AI? And it's not just a nice to have anymore, is it?
That's right. So Hamish, you're exactly right. It's not a nice to have. And I think that poll sort of illustrated the movement that we've seen over the last year. That same poll a year ago, that bottom row is probably 80%.
Really?
20% just getting started. So you can see people are already moving to the top on that.
Yeah.
And as people are moving to the top, it's true that accuracy has become a more prominent topic in industrial AI recently. And I think the ability to tackle that accuracy and trust issue will allow more people to flow to the top of that poll. Because the data that we're looking at says that essentially inspections have doubled in regulated industries over the last 3 years. And that's largely due to increasing complexity of operations based on, to a large extent, the introduction of new technologies which have impacted operations, basically how the work gets done. So as I'm listening to boards and CEOs throughout the last year, the conversation has shifted from we're applying AI to existing ops, but struggling to scale it, to we figured out how to apply AI and we're starting to see material productivity gains. And again, I think that poll reinforced that. From my seat, in terms of being an AI software vendor in this space focused on data accuracy and trust, what that means and what we're hearing from our customers is that they're saying traditional intelligent document processing, think optical character recognition plus maybe a few templates, that's absolutely table stakes. A lot of the big plants that we work with as customers, they need content that's AI ready, that's explainable, that's governed regardless of complexity. We're talking scans, multilingual supplier docs, CAD files, shift notes. I mean, the list goes on. So it's no surprise that many of the analysts, maybe the IDCs of the world included, are stating that up to 70% of AI pilots are stalling over, guess what, data readiness. All of that lends credibility to accuracy being the number one go, no-go sort of decision when determining if AI is ready to scale. So one of the things that I think about here is that in delivering against these board and CEO expectations, we've got customers like ASML who are basically demanding provenance. So who, what, when touch the documents, confidence scores. Can I trust this document? Based on a preset set of data values that they value, and then a chain of custody. So how the document has flowed through the organization, both the people that have touched it and the applications that it's been through. And at that point, you end up delivering compliance. And at the end of the day, that's what a lot of these enterprises are focused on. I want AI outputs that I can trust, that keep me compliant because of these regulatory hurdles and these increasing inspections that they're having.
Okay, fantastic. So I think that gives us a really good foundation for the rest of the discussion. Anthony, if I can come to you, we mentioned it at the beginning there in the topic description. What we really want to get into is this idea of RAG-ready content, right? And what that means for digital supply chains. So normalized, version controlled, auditable. Can you just kind of unpack that a little bit in concrete terms? And what does it actually mean for a supply chain leader, dealing with supplier contracts, quality certificates, maintenance reports? What does their world look like before and after if they manage to establish this foundation?
Yeah, perfect. So I believe we should start at highlighting what Chris mentioned around accuracy and trust. So with traditional IDP, it was good enough to get an extracted result that was near 80% accurate. That used to be the benchmark. What we're finding with today with AI and some of the newer technologies is 80% is no longer the benchmark. It needs to be accurate. It needs to be 100% accurate, and it needs to be predictable. So what we're moving towards and what the organizations that we're dealing with are moving towards is how do we get higher accuracy and predictability out of the AI investments that we've already made. So if you think about the way traditional IDP works is they start with a document, they typically classify a document. Based on that classification, they determine what fields need to be extracted. And then they go off and do their routine using very similar technologies, regardless of what the document may be. So in your question, you provided supplier contracts, and you also stated maintenance reports. if you actually take a look at those documents at the object level, a supplier contract is really machine text, maybe with a couple of signatures, right? But a maintenance report may be handwritten notes, maybe checkboxes, maybe actually have pictures. Those are very different objects and require different technology and setup in order to get an accurate outcome. So like that's the before picture. And I think what you're going to find with the after picture, and hopefully you'll learn more about this today as we go through the rest of the conversation, is that you don't really have to change your AI investments, but you may want to consider the type of documents that you're processing through your AI infrastructure and what you can do to pre-process and validate that data before and after the AI routine. So in the example of the supplier contract, OCR text layer and a PDF document provided to a large language model likely will yield a good result. But you take that same large language model and provide it to that maintenance report, which has handwritten notes, checkboxes, and pictures, you're going to get a very different outcome.
Right.
But that all can be solved by pre-processing your documents and delivering to those large language models the type of file types that are best optimized for that model, and also providing the appropriate context for that large language model, and more importantly, validating that the information is accurate either through, say, multiple large language models, validating against a known good data source, validating against external data sources, or even running scripts within a document itself. So that helps, on the AI and accuracy side. But your question included RAG, readiness.
Yeah.
And what we're finding is the typical way to chunk a document for RAG is like these illogical steps, like the number of characters, block it at a paragraph length, maybe even a page length. But really what happens is if you were to use those techniques, the document may be chunked inappropriately. There may be context that's cut off, too much context is provided. So I think what we're going to find in the after picture is that systems need to logically chunk a document such that that chunk that makes it to your database is embedded in a way that when you do your retrieval, it's accurate. And you'll see more about that as we go through the rest of the conversation as well.
Okay, fantastic. So I think that adds another layer of theory, and maybe it's time now to already get a little bit practical. So Sabrina, you work hands-on with factories implementing these AI solutions. Could you share a real-world example and what has actually happened, what that enabled on the plant floor?
Yeah, sure. So I think just to consolidate it as well, like the Siemens portfolio, it spans everything from like engineering, design, and there we, for example, also convert P&ID into digital searchable assets and generate PLC code, but also into runtime, right, to optimize more in the smart manufacturing environments where even more context and confidence, as you said before, is essential. One of our projects, for example, is in the CPG, so they produce home goods space, and their challenge was to create a centralized control room overseeing multiple plants with the long-term vision to also have more closed-loop AI-driven operations, reducing the operator workload. And initially, like we see that very often in projects, like 80% of their relevant data was unstructured and essential dark to AI. Right, it was fragmented in different formats, siloed systems. Also they had PDF storages. They had a lot of dashboards, images describing what a machine needs to then look like, what are the different namings for that in the manual, but it was not actionable anymore. So we helped them to integrate that and normalize this information, like this information, like from the sensor readings to the maintenance log, QA reports. And also, for example, their process language. I think that is also important. Not all is explained in documentation. So often we need to have additional glossaries or support that an LLM that is not trained in that context, right? And I'm not talking even about domain context, really. I'm talking about the specific customer process or production line even on that context. And this is where we kind of created then a single clean data orchestration layer for the whole operation. and what did we address there, right? So that is also often important to always think about for what are you doing that, right? So here, the foundational challenges were the alarm management and introducing the logic to prioritize critical alarms and alerts by contextualizing also the live data and the knowledge base, so to reduce this overall alarm flooding. And at the same time, we also saw that we can really drive AI-driven insights to support the operators actively, which is important to also not forget. How do you communicate that with the operators? How can you orchestrate the end-to-end workflow? So when we have an alarm that is triaged or a recommendation is generated, it does not stay at one of those 1,000 dashboards, but it's really pushed to the right person in the right time through the existing channel. In that case, it was a radio, to ensure really the fast action without disrupting the established process. But yeah, the big takeaway, all these advanced capabilities depend on getting the basics right. And this is really that we have the data and also the connectivity to all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. God, if I had $1 for every time I've talked to customers about getting the basics right first, I'd be a very, very rich man. Great. All right. So I think we've got some fantastic. We've really set the scene there. You've done a great job with that, guys. So thank you. We want to move now, get into the weeds a little bit more about some of these challenges. And before we do that, Paul, could you bring up the second poll, please? Because we want to find out what you guys are finding the most challenging at the moment, whether it's swapping, upgrading LLMs, adding more data RAG tools, prompt engineering, user training, investing in data quality, governance, normalization, or if you just haven't really tackled it yet, you're still kind of trying things out, experimenting. So if you could just give us a heads up on that, give you another few seconds, and then we'll see where you're at.
Hey, Sabrina, I have a question for you while we're waiting for the results.
Yeah.
One that was really helpful in terms of like your guys' approach to driving these projects. What's like a general timeline for the example that you just gave? Because that was really thorough. I especially like the feedback loop that you had in the end. I think that's really important and often overlooked.
Yeah, I think it's essential really talking to the end users that you are targeting. We try to not do a 3-year project like I think we often refer to, not naming that platform, but another one that is in Germany, at least very known project. So we need to find low-hanging fruits to get also people motivated and included in that process. So we often try to do 90-day sprints where we implement something with the first benefits. And the benefits, I mean, they can happen, of course, also after 4 weeks already. But it's really also getting, I think, we will not often get like this 99% accuracy at once, right? This is why we need to kind of fail fast. We need to include the right people with the right expectations and make those rounds to get the context right and the output right. And then also to gain the trust, because you also you don't want to give that if it's not entirely accurate to everyone yet, right? You need to find out your champions to see who are your pilot users that can help you to bring it to that accuracy that you needed for the broader operator staff.
Helpful, thanks. I know that's something we strive for a lot at AdLib, is that time to value. And it's funny you mentioned 90 days, like that's our marker as well.
Oh, really? So very good. That's good. Yeah, I think the faster the better, but I think we also want to make it right. And so it depends, of course, a lot on the landscape of the customer and the complexity of the use cases.
So nice when everybody's aligned like that, isn't it? And that word trust is going to keep coming up throughout the rest of the conversation as well, I think. It's so important. All right, Paul, could you bring up the results of the poll quickly? Fantastic. Okay, so here we go. 15% swapping, upgrading LLMs, just 2% adding more data, 8% prompt engineering, 35% investing in data quality, governance, normalization, and just over a third, not really tackled this properly yet, so still experimenting. So yeah, as Chris said earlier, I definitely think there's a big change from now compared with last year, but there's still a large proportion of people who are still at a relatively early stage. Okay, fantastic. So let's get into the weeds. And Anthony, I'm going to come to you first this time. And I know you've got something to show us as well. So when you look under the hood in some of this industrial content, whether that's drawings, multilingual documentation, scanned SOPs, handwritten shift notes like you were talking about before, where are the genuinely hard technical problems that you see? And what advances are happening in things like OCR, IDP, intelligent chunking that you're most excited about because they're opening up new use cases for manufacturers?
Yeah, so to touch on what I mentioned earlier, this notion of object in your document. So you just mentioned a few more document types that are typically within supply chain or manufacturing. Yeah. I really ask you to take an honest look when you get back to your desk at the document types that your organization has. And you'll find there's signature blocks, there's charts, there's diagrams, there's hand diagrams, there's checkboxes, there's embedded 3D and 2D models. Each one of these things represents complexity that a large language model or AI system has trouble processing. So what I'm most excited about is the ways that you can decompose documents to get to a point where the objects are truly what the large language models are focused at. All right, so what I'll go through next is like some of the techniques that AdLib is using in order to get to a point of better AI accuracy and outcomes. Mm-hmm. So the first one probably should be very clear by now. It's just this notion of decomposing a document. So when AdLib looks at a document, we're not looking at it as quote unquote a standard operating procedure or a quality assurance report. We're literally looking at the next layer underneath, which is what objects make up that document. If there's checkboxes, if there's handwriting, if there's text, if there's pictures, each one of those represents a different way that AdLib should be processing that document to provide the AI what it requires to have a better outcome. All right, so this is all about normalizing content, normalizing file types, and getting to the object levels so that the AI outcome is what you expect. Now, we're also realizing that there's many large language models out there and AI systems, and not all of them are great at everything. So what we find is some customers say, I chose my model, it's OpenAI, and it does really good with text, and it does really bad with pictures, right? They don't say that, but that's what they're finding in reality. So what we're finding is once you have this object level, you may need to introduce various technologies to get the outcomes that you expect. And what you're about to see in this video I'm going to share is a side-by-side comparison of GPT-5 without AdLib and GPT-5 with many of the processing techniques that I'm about to talk to. All right, so let's move, let's move to the video. We can actually showcase that live. Mm-hmm. So what you're about to see is a document that was provided to us from a customer that considered this to be their stress document. They quite frankly said, hey, we've talked to many organizations like yourself, AdLib, all claim the same. You're going to get me to a better AI outcome. Prove it. Here's a document that we consider our gatekeeper. Mm-hmm. And you can see here that this document is a police report. In this case, the company was an insurance agency. And this is a combination of different objects. The objects are checkboxes. The objects are hand-drawn diagrams, right? What you see in the middle. There's handwritten text, which is cursive. And at the bottom here is some more handwritten text. In this case, we're looking for Memorial Hospital. So if you actually go back to the beginning of the document, what I'm going to be asking AdLib to do, and also ask ChatGPT to do, is pull out a couple of these fields. All right, the first one we're going to ask for is this traffic control, and the proper answer is road sign. All right, the next one we're going to ask for is weather. In this case, the answer is clear. We're going to ask for road surface, and in this case, it's straight. We're going to ask the AI to summarize the picture in its own words. And you'll see here that there's Highway 349. At the bottom of this thing is a stop sign. All right, there's 2 cars involved. We're then going to ask it to not summarize, but to transcribe this cursive text and then pull out the location. Okay, so once again, many objects in this document, and the overarching theme here is that it's also very poor image quality. Okay, this is very difficult for a single large language model to do. So what you're going to see here as we go through the rest of this is AdLib is going to set up multiple large language models. So we're using Google Gemini, we're using ChatGPT-5, which is the same model we're using over here. And we're not putting 3 models against one. What we're doing is what I suggested earlier, is that this document has different object types. And some of these models are better at certain object types than others. So if you're going to trust your AI outcomes to a single model, you may find that that model isn't good enough for all the object types you have within your document. Okay, so that's why we're providing 3 different models here. Also, what we're doing is I've asked it to pull out those 6 attributes that I described earlier. We're also going to be providing those same exact attributes, word for word, into GPT-5. So literally copy paste from AdLib into Copilot using GPT-5, and then we'll allow this to run through its processing. Okay, so we've now uploaded the same exact documents to both GPT-5 with a single model and AdLib using its pre-processing. So what AdLib has done here is we've converted it to both TIFF and PDF. We've separated the object types, right? And we've provided all that information to the 3 large language models of choice. And we've also run it through something we call the AdLib Trust Score. And what you're going to find here, if you can read this in the small view, I believe you have the opportunity to expand your screen as well, that GPT-5 got it nearly entirely wrong. And the point here is that GPT-5 is bad and AdLib's good. That's not the point. The point is we didn't set up GPT-5 for success. We gave it a really messy document, and we didn't help it understand the objects that were within. And what large language models do poorly at is saying, I give up. I don't know. You got me. Right? What we did on AdLib is just the opposite. We set it up for success. We broke the file down to TIFF and PDF. We separated the object types. We told the large language model what object types are specifically in this document and gave it the context required in order to be successful. And this is really the whole notion of accuracy and trust. And what we're trying to impart at AdLib is we don't have our own large language models. We don't provide you a fine-tuned model or a machine learning model. But we do believe if you improve your ingestion and you clean up the document, pre-process it in such a way and provide the appropriate context that's standardized and normalized, you can yield a much better outcome from the same exact AI infrastructure that you've already invested in. And that's really the notion of trust and accuracy.
Okay, fantastic. That's very illustrative. So I think that's a classic example, Chris, isn't it, of data that's inconsistent, unstructured, and trapped in a document that was never designed for AI, right? So maybe you can talk a little bit about how big, in your experience, how big is that blind spot for a typical manufacturer, and where should plant and supply chain leaders start if they want their document layer to start being as AI ready as their sensor data?
Yeah, Anthony brought that forward. He and his team brought that demo forward to me about a month ago, that side-by-side look. And it really was almost like a mic drop for me.
Yeah.
Because from the very beginning, we're not going to replicate, obviously, what I see as being the new infrastructure play for enterprises, which are these large language models. What we want to do is how can we help our customers get better ROI from their existing enterprise AI investments? And so I think that's what Anthony clearly showed there. So I think there's a huge share of like decision critical data that lives in those documents. And I think Anthony showcased how critical that data is. And then the importance on getting that accurate is that basically you take out a lot of that human, like, I don't trust the data, need to go and clean it up because the outputs are clearly wrong. All of that time gets saved. And that labor obviously gets allocated to higher value activities. But these documents were never designed for AI. Anthony showed you one police report, but think contracts, quality certifications, maintenance logs, the CAD drawings that we touched on earlier. I mean, the list goes on. And they're scattered across, like the customers on this call right now, like, these documents are scattered across your systems of record, your PLMs, your MES, your ERPs, but it's also in emails, it's also in shared drives. So what we believe is that clean inputs cut exception rates and cycle times 30 to 50% easy day. And it prevents your teams from burning all these cycles on fixing inputs. Instead, they can be focused on automating decisions, driving the autonomous workflows that Sabrina was talking about, that her team was able to deliver. I think this is where in manufacturing, there's a huge productivity loss that's easily captured. So we have customers like BP, like Hess, who are using AdLib to transform their CAD drawings into AI-ready PDFs, JSONs, and that's resulting in CAD workflow optimization and, using their words, not mine, like millions of dollars in engineering capacity that's been completely removed from the manual conversion work that they were previously doing. So anybody here that's looking to replicate, the success of BP or Hess, it's not a secret. I would say you would, start with a 90-day playbook, pick one high-value use case, map the upstream sources, use software in combination with your existing AI investments to normalize and segment your documents, to validate the data, as Anthony was illustrating, using a multi-model LLM voting approach, publish AI-ready outputs with provenance. Provenance, again, is like who touched it, what did they do to the document, and when did they do it? So you have that audit-ready chain of command and chain of custody of that document. But that's really important, is that you insist from your software vendor, because I saw in that last poll that people want to move to the top. It feels like they just don't know which bet they need to place in order to get that data quality to where it needs to be. But you did see the largest of the top three on those rows being around sort of the data ingest and the quality. So I think everybody has a good hunch. They're starting to place bets on that hunch. Hopefully this, the hour that we're spending here gives them even more confidence on placing that bet, because you're headed down the right path in doing that. But anyways, that's how BP and Hess address their document blind spots and scale their pilots into production. But probably most importantly, it made their audits non-events. And as we all know, audits typically are an all hands on deck fire drill. And so being able to address this isn't just an operational improvement. It is truly aligning with the strategic sort of enterprise narrative of your company.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
I just have one thought to interject here. So you mentioned earlier about these documents were never intended to be AI, driven by AI.
Yeah.
And I think that's an amazing point. And the reason for that is what I've witnessed is most customers are trying to deal with their day forward documents, the documents they're creating today or the documents they're receiving today. That's why there's so much general and horizontal solution around invoice processing and claims processing and things like that. These are kind of day forward activities. Yeah. But I think what's being realized is as you start to pre-process your documents and have the ability to convert file types for those files that were never intended to be leveraged by AI, these companies are able to unlock all the potential in these documents that were once considered archive. All right, so think of all the intellectual property that you have locked within a document that can, is this a non-searchable PDF or a message file or a zip file or whatever other file format that isn't really compatible with a large language model. And now you have the opportunity to unlock that. You have the opportunity to put that into a system that you can search against, that you can do RAG search against, that you have the ability to inform and educate your models. So it's no longer just a day forward look. You have the opportunity to really unlock all of your intellectual property from days past. And we have companies that are doing this for documents that are 50, 60 years old, that are some handwritten, of course, that are typewritten, that are done on a word processor. These are old land leases and things like that, which were once considered dead documents and now have a new life through pre-processing and AI.
And that is a perfect segue into what I want to talk next to Sabrina about, which is sometimes not just with this topic, but generally, I think that this is almost like an elephant in the room, which is that we're not talking about shiny new factories all over the place here. A lot of the time, we're talking about old factories with machines that are decades old, a total patchwork of software, some of which people don't really know how it works anymore. And on top of that, you've got the people who do know how it works retiring, so you're losing a whole load of knowledge on that front as well. So in that kind of scenario, in that kind of brownfield environment, and where you're potentially losing knowledge out of the workforce, how do you tackle interoperability, and how do you get the whole LLM and the AI system up to speed in that type of situation?
Yeah, I think those are like two great challenges, like the brownfield challenge, right? That we are talking here mostly about as well. So what we want is to also meet the customers, manufacturers where they are, right? So we don't expect, and that will not happen, that everyone rips out everything, right, and just replaces a new infrastructure where everything is already like AI ready, right? This will of course not happen. This is why it's so important to be open and to have a flexible integration approach, right? So sometimes we start, for example, with a plant and a line where they have done a lot of work to bringing the data into a certain shape and quality and layer of the automation layer. And sometimes we need to, for example, support in getting our industrial edge devices to tap really into the more legacy PLCs to collect data using standard protocols like OPC-UA, MQTT, and all of that, right? To funnel that data first of all. And I think here you can just think of like a translation layer to all the machines, right? It doesn't matter on who's vendor or how old they are. So to be able to speak that common language to AI. And I think what we saw also before, and I love that comparison, because we often see the expectations from also brownfield customers that say, okay, well, I know ChatGPT, this is what I want, right? And they have the same expectations. But of course, ChatGPT and those LLMs also from OpenAI and others, or Gemini, are not trained with your data, with that PLC data, with that manual data, with processes and the language and that. So I think this is where we see there is a lot of, we often call it contextual engineering that needs to be done for those LLMs. And I think also a blind spot, as you said, right, with the tribal knowledge, right? I think that is often a massive blind spot. We don't want to only search and retrieve information, we also need to analyze. The tribal knowledge is crucial in all the industries. We still have humans in place, and this will not change in the next decade. So I think now more and more people actually get the numbers out on how many of their key experts will leave the company in the next 2 or 3 years. And this is, of course, knowledge that they lose, and we need to combine people, process, and tech here. So I think you all need to be reminded, you need to start early on, not when they already handed in or like are already one step into retirement. This can be done also to like do cross trainings, or we have, for example, we use LLMs and or our own co-pilots to interview, for example, also experts. And as you saw in this document, for example, there's a lot of knowledge that is very much key in special critical scenarios that I don't know, John always knew how to tweak that machine in that space, right? This is what you need to get, and this is not in a manual, and this is maybe it's in a chat, right, in a Teams chat or so, but often these are the kind of scenarios you need to tap in early on to get that, and then of course always think how you can orchestrate that knowledge, right? So it's often less about the single AI algorithm, it's really the engineering of the data pipeline and how you orchestrate all of that. And this is why it's important to invest in that better data strategy upfront.
Yeah, and there's also a very good economic reason for doing that, because if you don't, you're going to end up hiring all those people back as consultants,
exactly,
and paying them twice as much as you paid them before. So,
yeah,
which has happened.
But then you listen to them at least.
Hey, Sabrina, like you mentioned something really cool about like the shifting demographics and people sort of dropping out of the workforce, it leaving a gap because maybe we haven't brought in the next generation and had ample time to like ramp up their experience level. I can tell you internally, we try to drink our own champagne at AdLib. So we use a lot of AI internally to give us, you know, the capacity that we need to move faster than our competitors to deliver better experiences to our customers. An SVP inside AdLib basically said, Chris, we can't get enough of your time. So we created a Chris GPT. What the team did is they took like all of my stuff, like how I think, and I send out like a Friday email to the entire company that says, here's my observations this week, good, bad, and ugly. Here's my observations, my thoughts on it. Like, do we go left, right, stay center, whatever the case is. And he fed it into and created using our enterprise GPT. So, you know, it's private, everything's sealed. But now everybody has the opportunity to go to Chris GPT and like stress test their early ideas before they come into like a monthly CEO meeting, or they're preparing for the board meeting. They can stress test all their stuff there. So I think it's absolutely, yes, it's the retiring workforce and the workforce that isn't going to be there, but it's also a way to amplify the surface area that executives can cover, that managers can cover with their existing team. So if you feel, Sabrina, yourself being pulled in many directions and your calendar just gets overrun, create a Sabrina GPT.
Yes, we actually also have, so shout out to Caleb Eastman. We also have kind of a clone with him, because you always have champions in your organization that bring in people, process the huge domain expertise that connects to all of that. And I think we are also within Siemens using a lot of that voice of the customer, but also AI just to kind of share knowledge and to tap into everything that we already have done and use best practices. This is why we, in a system approach, also always want to bring in those best practices and do not want to start from scratch, because maybe in Austria they have done something like that already, and so let's get their lessons learned in before we even start here.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Okay, so we need to hurry it along now, because we're already 40 minutes in. And I know Anthony wanted to also ask you, Sabrina, about this kind of open ecosystem aspect, right? So platforms where OEMs, app partners, customers can plug in together instead of building yet another silo. So could you talk a little bit about what good interoperability looks like in that context?
I mean, maybe also to just point it very shortly, right? We like that orchestration layer, for example. It's kind of a it's a backbone that we use, where we have Industrial Edge as a connectivity part, but you can also, for example, connect to other systems. You can also connect from there to a lot of IT systems there, so it doesn't need to be there. So, for example, with AdLib, right, this would be an input for us, right? So in that orchestration layer. And then what you can do on that orchestration layer with WinCC, you can do a lot of like prediction analytics. You can do also dashboards. You can also, for example, do a digital twin where you need to simulate a more complex process for specific equipment. But then we also have MCP. So either we use our own agents and LLMs that we connect to, or if you already have one, we can also with MCP connect directly to that, right? So it's always a little bit the comparison, right, on, as we saw, how good are the LLMs and what do you need to do in effort for the engineering, and what is something from the tools perspective and versioning and all of that you need in that manufacturing context. But I think this is one example, right? We can tap into everything. We just we are flexible enough basically to bring it all together in that orchestration layer, because this is where at the end the access matters and the people need to dive in.
Okay. And Anthony, so where do you see a content and accuracy layer then acting as almost like a kind of middleware within that ecosystem and allowing data to flow cleanly between all these different parties in the ecosystem?
Yeah. Chris Slackman or rest, I can't use middleware anymore. I have to use like connective tissue or some other model for that. But yeah, no, this is a very important point. Hamish, a couple of minutes ago, you mentioned around documents that were never meant to be processed by AI. The same is true of systems. Many of these systems were never intended to be connected to AI. So what we find in many cases, our customers are stuck trying to figure out how to connect the unconnected. Now, one of the good points of AdLib is for 20-something years, we've been doing this in reverse. So we've been receiving raw content, chaotic information, and what we've been asked to do is create structured documents. We call them documents of record, so that we could submit to your engineering system, to your PLM system, to your ERP systems, to your CRM systems, and also to your regulatory authorities. So the reason why that structure exists is so that when your downstream line of business receives the document, they know what it is. It always looks the same. It's always conformant, not only internally conformant, but also conformant to the regulatory authority should you need to submit to them. Well, I would argue that the same is true of your AI pipeline. You need to get to a point of standardization so that you're able to take these documents from these various systems, develop them in a standard pipeline so that, as I said earlier, your AI outcomes have the best chance for success. Now, that's all done through a world that isn't standardized today. Like Anthropic didn't get with Amazon, didn't get with Microsoft to say, tell me a standard way to develop prompts and stream my files, right? So you find yourself like stuck in this world where I know I want to use many, I potentially want to evaluate several, but it's very difficult to do. So an organization or a solution like AdLib kind of becomes this universal translator, where you develop the prompts within AdLib, and we take care of all the pre-processing, streaming, and everything else that's required to get to these various systems. We also, Sabrina used MCP. This is Model Context Protocol, for those that don't know. This is also an emerging technology and protocol that allows various agentic AI systems to connect. And the reason why we find that to be important is it's one thing to get your document into your AI system so that it can be processed, but the second layer must also be validation. And sometimes your information that you're validating against is a system that you need to connect to this model, to this world, to this ecosystem, and it was never intended to be connected. So that could be your ERP system, it could be your CRM system, it could even be an external database. So that's one of the reasons why solutions like AdLib play this really important role of not only pre-processing these documents, but also helping you connect systems that were never meant to be connected. And it's part of our heritage and it's part of our lineage, and we're happy to do it for you as well.
Fantastic. All right, thank you for that. So one of my favorite things to do in these sessions is to get people to get their crystal balls out. And Chris, in a recent interview, you were describing a 2028 plant where shift logs are auto-generated, operators ask questions in natural language, and the plant itself is explaining the decisions it makes, not just raising alarms about something that's gone wrong. So amazing vision. If we think about what has to happen end to end, between now and 28, which is only a couple of years away now, especially around this whole topic of documents, unstructured data, what has to happen in that for your vision to become a reality, do you think?
Ooh, you really went into the archives there. So I think there's probably a few things that need to take place, and this is across the supply chain to create more of like a frictionless flow of data that's AI ready and regulatory compliant. And Sabrina and Anthony have already started to talk about, the connectivity piece, things like Model Context Protocol, agent to agent. So there's going to be a few, I think, that will emerge. But the first thing, and I think this is just hammering home a lot of what it is we've talked about so far, which is just treat your documents as data products. Treat your documents as data products, meaning a lot of what Anthony said, break the specs, the certificates, the SOPs, the shift notes, Hamish, that you mentioned, into structured objects. But I also think it's important to consider, especially in manufacturing, version control and policy tags. So that way you can feed whether it's a co-pilot, whether it's the retrieval augmented generation that Anthony was talking about, reliably across plants and suppliers. So not just within your plant to operate, but also with your suppliers as it needs to be shared. Next thing I would say is you should probably make like provenance and validation non-negotiable, which means every extracted field should have confidence scores, business rule checks, and probably a link back to the document of record. So that way any recommendations are explainable, they're audit ready, and that's how I believe you gain trust, that's how you accelerate adoption, and it just sort of becomes embedded within the natural workflow moving forward. I would also move from single model bets to model orchestration. Again, something that the team here has completely hammered home, which is, think multi-LLM voting plus some rules, embedding that in your workflows and not treating it as a sidecar proof of concept, which a lot of these get treated as. And if you treat it as a sidecar project and it's not connected to the actual work, it's very difficult to sort of catch up, if you will. I think doing that should provide a solid starting point to scale accuracy beyond pilots and allow you to better connect into your broader supply chain ecosystem.
Okay, fantastic. So Sabrina, let's talk about the next stage of AI in manufacturing from your perspective. What kind of solutions are you envisioning, and what do you think has to be in place to do that safely on a plant floor?
I mean, I think what has to be in place is, I think, also a lot what Chris already mentioned in some of those more like from the document perspective. What I want to see, I have worked in the shop floors also, like a lot in automotive and from assembly and all of that, right? I think I want to go into more that not just retrieving information, but really getting proactive recommendations, basically to the right people at the right point in time, and sometimes even closed loop scenarios. So instead of asking why is what does that downtime mean? What do I need to do? Basically, that it's more hey, we are 5% under efficiency. I suggest reducing machine B's feed to rate by a notch to avoid a jam. Shall I supply that adjustment? Kind of suggestion, right? So I think that is for me more the way going forward to really get more output at the end, less waste, which also is a lot of time that we see. And those real-time recommendations, of course, taking into consideration the current production line, the staffing, all the error codes in the line. You always have a correlation, of course, of machines, right? It's not only like siloed machines. If you have an entire process, how that affects each other. And I think that is a little bit where I think it's going. Also, of course, trust and governance is super important, especially in the closed loop scenario. So here, for example, we have the MTP approach here, which is kind of a let's say like has business rules for machines that not an AI system or an LLM can just like do all the settings, but you have specific rules where, for example, also in some certain cases, you need an operator to confirm that, right? This is also a important safety layer in those closed loop scenarios. These are all topics we are already working on, but I think it will be more and more, and it, of course, it needs to be scalable, and scalable means also, especially those operators need to adopt it, right? There needs to be a value in it. They need to, especially the new generation, which might be a little bit easier because they are more used in that digital world, but they need to adopt those solutions.
Okay, fantastic. So we've only got 9 minutes left. We're running out of time a little bit, so I'm gonna kind of consolidate the last part of this a little bit, and in a minute I'm going to come back to you, Sabrina, and Chris, to talk about this trust issue, because it's such a big topic and it's kind of been woven through the entire conversation. So I'm going to come to that in the end. Before we do that, I would just like to give Anthony the opportunity, in terms of for a manufacturer or OEM that wants an AI-ready document layer as part of their OTI infrastructure, what are the 3 or 4 questions that they should ask to separate a traditional template-based IDB tool from a true accuracy and connectivity partner? Those 3 or 4 questions would be, I think, very practical help for the audience.
Yeah, so I'll keep this short. So I guess the first question I would ask is, how many document samples do I need to provide for training? And if it's anything more than 1, you're likely dealing with a company that's traditional IDP, and is using your documents to train against this models. And I'm not suggesting this approach is wrong or bad. I'm just suggesting that it's not providing the same level of flexibility and accuracy and predictability that you might get in your production environment, where your documents are widely varying, your image quality is widely varying, your suppliers may change, and each one of those will require a new template to be modified or created. So that's one question. Second question is really around this notion of what I call zero-shot accuracy. What AdLib really is attempting to do is, the LLMs are getting so good, and what we're finding is if you really set them up for success, that they can be near 100% accurate, specifically if you're doing validation afterwards. So the second question would be, what are your zero-shot accuracy expectations for documents just like yours? You need to make certain that that's like an important qualifier, because if they're just giving generic document accuracy rates, they may not be anywhere related to the document types or image quality that you're dealing with. So very specific to your documents. And then the last one would be, do I need to use your AI tech stack, or can I use my own? And the reason for that is typically when you're using an organization's AI tech stack and you're mandated to use it, it's a single model that may or may not be good at certain things. And hopefully we've proven throughout this conversation today that certain object types do require certain technology. And being locked into a tech stack doesn't really allow you to adapt to the technology that you require to get the AI outcome you would expect. But also you lose the ability to innovate at the pace that AI is innovating at today.
Right. Fantastic. All right. Thank you very much, Anthony. So let's finish off with trust then. So Chris, let's say you're a VP of manufacturing or supply chain. You want your frontline teams to actually be able to rely on AI-driven decisions. What is your practical trust playbook look like to enable that?
Yeah, so I'll try to answer this briefly, but I'll also try to answer it within the context of a question that's sitting out there right now, which is a really, really good one, which is, so this gentleman looks like he's with AWS within their IoT services stack solution. Yeah. And they're trying to unlock SAP data, and they're using Snowflake as their cloud data management platform. You could envision, as I'm getting ready to let you know how we would tackle this, as almost like an API call from the complex data within Snowflake that you're trying to analyze and provide insights back to the customer with. So I would say that the design principle for AdLib, at least since I've been here, has been to treat trust like a product feature, knowing that teams adopt 2 to 3x faster when things like recommendations include confidence scores, include source citations, things like that. So I would say there's probably 4 or 5 step process that we use to make sure that documents are AI ready and compliant. So that way you can trust AI outputs. And again, it would almost be like an API call from Snowflake to AdLib in this example that's teed up here. First is to govern the inputs. With simple, view them as data contracts per document type. What fields are required, formats, sources of truth, allowed variants, and we call these precision paths, essentially schemas, data models, workflows that are use case specific. Anything outside the contract gets quarantined. It does not get snuck into an AI model. And that's what allows you to maintain model integrity and trusted outputs. Oftentimes it's shoving everything in there, regardless if it's relevant or not. It's obviously going to compromise the integrity of the AI outputs. Next is to validate before you recommend. That means the field level confidence scores plus business rule checks. So totals, units, cross references, things like that. And then setting thresholds for humans to jump in, but only when something is out of policy. Next is the provenance, making that non-negotiable. As I said earlier, one-click trace from original file to normalization, to extraction, to decision. That should be tamper-evident audit trail proof. Next would be, and Sabrina started to talk to this earlier, but predictive maintenance for data. I think that's where you start to monitor for any drift signals, scan quality, vendor form changes in manufacturing, classification mixes. And then the last thing I would say is just to provide a glass box UX to help with that predictive maintenance for that data, which means that every answer shows its source, its confidence, which checks have passed. I think that's really important to have that glass box UX. And we found that to be almost like an airtight approach to teams quickly gaining trust in the results, which nearly eliminates that manual double checking.
All right, fantastic. And Sabrina, could you give us your final thoughts about your playbook for working with a customer from an initial pilot to scaling AI across multiple sites? While you're doing that, I'm just going to get Paul also to bring up the final poll.
Yeah.
Paul, if you could do that. So
yeah, sure.
Audience members, you just go ahead and submit that answer, and we'll let Sabrina finish off. Thanks, Sabrina.
Yeah, perfect. So listening and selecting something should be doable. So I think what you said, Chris, right? A lot of that is, I think, essential. Work with a selected people in that pilot to get that trust. I think they need to understand not every detail, not that all the technical details, but they need to understand it well enough in their language that they know, is it working the links to the documentation and where they have, like where this result was generated to make it explainable, right? I think those are typical topics, but also to understand where can they, for example, give feedback, right? In terms of, hey, I actually have a better solution, or this is wrong, we need to change it. So also you need to have a mechanism on how to validate that this output was really the right one, and if not, how can we make those changes also tested and then introduce us for the broader organization. Always do not let yourself lead by only, oh, this is AI, right? We just have a AI use case or Gen AI use case. I think that is something where we often need to separate between the like C-level, what they want to have, and the operational targets. It always needs to be a high impact use case, right? It needs to be important to do, otherwise it stays as a nice to have, and it's a showcase, right? But we want to really deliver an outcome, and also to understand, okay, is it a one-off thing for specifically that plant, or can we actually transfer and scale that, right? And learn for the others. So making a long-term journey for that to increase the overall future. So I think, 90 days, the selection process is important, but then it's really just also get the teams together. It's always important to get the internal people and our people, for example, work as a team to accomplish that. So that's in very short, but I can also, of course, give more to that later.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. We are out of time, unfortunately, so it just remains me to thank you all panelists for your great insights and knowledge. Thanks again to the sponsor, AdLib Software. Without you guys, it wouldn't be possible to run events like this, so thank you very much. Thanks to, of course, our attendees. If you did ask a question which we didn't get to, we will get back to you after the event. And it's now time to move on to the next session, Closing the Skills Gap Before It Closes Your Factory, sponsored by Arch Systems. Enjoy the rest of the event. Bye for now.